People in North Georgia are familiar with the legends surrounding what lurks beneath Lake Lanier. Claims about Lake Lanier continue to circulate not just in Georgia, but also around the nation, drawing attention to what some people refer to as Georgia's most haunted lake. These claims range from cemeteries buried by the water to reported ghostly occurrences near Brown's Bridge. Oscarville, a rural majority black town that originally stood in the northeastern Forsyth, close to the border of Hall County on a section of property ultimately utilized to construct the lake, is highlighted in some of the stories that were recounted. Flooding of the prosperous black community in Forsyth County, Georgia, marks the culmination of the most effective racial purge in American history. There were around 1,100 African Americans living in Oscarville in 1910, and they had their own homes, churches, schools, and businesses. All of that changed in 1912 when a nearby white community in Forsyth County, which is divided by the Chattahoochee River, drove them out and forced the residents of Oscarville to sell their land for a low price or die. This is the terrible story of the town that lies beneath Lake Lanier, Oscarville. So sit back, relax, let's get into it. When the Beaufort Dam was finished in 1956, a vast 58 square mile reservoir known as Lake Lanier was created. It still helps in managing flooding along the Chattahoochee River and offers water and electricity to locals close to Atlanta. But to understand how and why this enormous lake came to be, we must first go back 45 years to 1912 in the little African American community of Oscarville. About 1,100 black people lived in Oscarville, which was located along the Chattahoochee River. The majority of these people were freed after fighting in the American Civil War. Many did odd jobs for white people living in nearby areas or labored as hands in cotton fields. They were able to support themselves with a respectable income, building a strong neighborhood with churches, schools, and small businesses. Many residents were still on edge following the 1906 race riots in Atlanta and believed additional violence could break out at any time. On September 5, 1912, a white lady called Ellen Grice, then 22 years old, claimed that two black males had attempted to assault her but were scared away by her mother. 5 black guys were detained by the sheriff of Forsyth County for the alleged attack. In the nearby black neighborhoods, news of the attack and arrest created quite a commotion. Grant Smith, a prominent black pastor, pleaded with the sheriff to free the men. He asserted that there wasn't enough proof to convict all 5 individuals of assault and offered the possibility that one of the guys may have previously been involved in a consensual relationship with Ellen Grice. Pastor Smith's accusations infuriated many white people, and an enraged mob attacked and horsewhipped the preacher on the courthouse steps, almost killing him. The mob demanded that Pastor Smith be hung or set on fire. The National Guard was called in by Georgia's Governor Joseph Mackey Brown to calm down protests, and the prisoners were moved to several locations for their protection before being placed in an Atlanta jail. An 18-year-old white lady named May Crow was assaulted a week later on September 12, 1912, in the Big Creek neighborhood of Forsyth County, Georgia. May Crow's body was discovered the following morning, half naked, bloodied, and covered behind a mound of leaves. She was alive and barely breathing after having her head bashed in with a stone. The crime scene would reportedly contain a little pocket mirror that belonged to Ernest Knox, a 16-year-old black kid from Cumming, Georgia. After getting arrested at his residence, Ernest Knox was put through a fake lynching, which forced him to make a pressured confession for the attack on May Crow. On September 23, 1912, May Crow passes away as a result of the assault's injuries. Mae Crow is never able to accuse anyone of being involved in her attack since she never comes to. White people became angrier as news of the assault on Mae Crow and Ernest Knox's admission of guilt circulated. In front of the jailhouse where Knox was being held, a lynch mob quickly assembled. Late that night, officers had to smuggle Ernest Knox out the back door in order to spare him from being hung. He was sent to an Atlanta jail for his safety, although he would soon go on trial for the assault. The next day, Trusty Jane Daniel, Oscar Daniel, Rob Edwards, and Ed Collin were all hauled into jail for being accused of helping the 16-year-old commit the crime. They were all black. A second enraged crowd of more than 2,000 white people quickly overran the county jail and entered the cells. Rob Edwards was shot to death. His body was dragged from the jail and he was hung from a telephone pole in the town square as people took turns shooting him. Despite thousands of witnesses, not a single person was held accountable for the lynching. Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel were both convicted of Mae Crow's sexual assault and murder. Even though it was against state law at the time, they were given the death penalty by hanging. A day before the executions were scheduled to take place, a tarp was set up to conceal the hangings, but it was purposely destroyed by fire. Over 8,000 white people gathered in Cummings Town Square to witness two adolescent boys being publicly hung for a crime they never really had a chance to defend themselves against. Despite the fact that there was little to no supporting evidence, many people continued to believe the boys' innocence. Trusty Daniels' charges were dropped when the prosecutor and judge visited her cell and made a deal with her, asking her to testify against Oscar Daniel and Ernest Knox. The all-white jury took little over an hour to convict the two boys for Mae Crow's killing. After the executions, a white terrorist group known as the Night Riders made it their aim to drive any black person they saw out of town. This is when the fear first started to spread. One of their primary targets would ultimately be Oscarville, where over the course of only a few years, 98% of its black citizens would either leave their houses or be killed for refusing to evacuate. White neighbors acquired black property deeds without any sort of document of sale or transfer. When the Night Riders drove the black people off their property, this essentially permitted numerous white people to seize the land that had previously belonged to them. More than 1,100 black people would lose their jobs, and Oscarville, a once thriving African-American community, would become a ghost town. Oscarville was the beginning of the racial purging, but it didn't end there. A proposal to construct Lake Lanier was in full swing in 1950 when portions of the stolen property were sold to the American government. Oscarville would soon be completely underwater after being purposely flooded in conjunction with the Beaufort Dam to meet the rising need for a water supply for the adjacent communities. Thousands of acres of farmland were destroyed. Hundreds of people were uprooted, and over 20 black graveyards were submerged. But the rest of Forsyth County remained unaffected and remained an all-white county for a few more decades. Forsyth County didn't have the whites only and coloreds only signs during the Jim Crow period, since there were no black people to be segregated. The racial purging of Forsyth County took place in 1912, but it wasn't until January 1987 that Cumming, Georgia made national headlines. In Forsyth County, where no black people have lived for 75 years, about 15,000 to 20,000 civil rights marchers, many of them black, marched to the courthouse square. A violent response was given to the activists. Residents were observed hurling rocks at the civil rights activists and shouting racial epithets at them. Civil rights pioneers Jose Williams and Coretta Scott King led the march. Jose Williams stated, "We've come back to Forsyth County today to prove that truth crushed to earth shall rise again. Please understand, Forsyth County, before we will be your slaves, we'd rather be buried in our graves and go home to our God and be free. Due to the high amount of drownings that occur there, many people now think Lake Lanier is haunted. According to authorities, there is a complete town with buildings and even a forest region with 60-foot tall trees underwater. It makes moving through the lake more difficult. According to them, a person can drown fast after becoming stuck in debris. Hey, you watched to the very end. We appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching another episode of Aggressive Intelligence. See you in the next one.
On track, now we gon' way up. Don't be used as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up.